Howdy, hello, hi, this is Laura, or you can also call me Lala, and this is Lumbradita Talks. These are some random thoughts on imposter syndrome and this expression that is used, el que no tranza no avanza. That is something that I feel that is it's an expression that can be used in a kind of more or less cynical way, but to me, that expression really just illuminates how people can be very creative and clever and intelligence in finding ways to survive this world. And so I was thinking on this idea of like imposter syndrome, how I posted that video last week talking about how insecurity can be a form of self sabotage. And I acknowledged how imposter syndrome, how that's a very real thing. And unfortunately, certain systems are not designed with us in mind and not intended for us to be there. And so when we experience imposter syndrome, it's my belief that it's because those spaces are not welcoming of us. We're not expected to be there. Like less than 10% of Hispanic women get their master's degree, less than 2% get their doctorate. There's a reason why people like me, when I was in my graduate program, for example, why I felt kind of like out of place. And imposter syndrome is just this idea that like we question our competence and we question whether or not we're skilled to be there. We question whether or not we earned our place. And it even more so to the point of this like almost like this fear of being caught, which is very strange because we are more than competent and we do deserve to be there if we want to be there. But unfortunately, not all those spaces, again, are designed for us with us in mind to succeed in those spaces. And so I was just thinking back on like the fact that Spanish is my first language. Me speaking Spanish was not optional. And I will say that I do believe that this is the greatest gift that my parents could have given me. Me being able to speak Spanish and it not being optional. And I was the first one out of all my siblings to speak English. And my dad does speak English. It was his second language, just like me. But it was one of those things where like si hablas con tu papá en inglés enfrente de mí no tienes modales. It's like this idea of like you don't have manners if you're speaking with your dad in front of me. If you're speaking English with him in front of me and I don't understand, that's rude. And so I kind of grew up knowing that, and I will fess up that like my siblings and I do want to just call it out. I believe that we need to work on that because now at this point, when we all gather and we're all speaking in English, I have noticed that my mom feels left out of the conversation, and so I'm gonna on my end hold myself accountable to work on that. But yeah, so like there's this long history, right? There's this long history of Spanish in this country and in this state of Texas, in public schools, it being penalized and prohibited to speak. The Blackwell School in Marfa, Texas, is an example of that. There has been a history of segregation and forced assimilation, and so there are generations in this country and in this state in particular where folks were forced to lose their language. I feel very fortunate that that was not my case. When I was in an elementary school, and I was learning how to speak English. I remember like in third grade, this teacher that I had, Mrs. Rodriguez, she really supported me in learning how to read because up until that point I didn't know how to read, and that's a whole nother story. And I remember that particular year because it was the first year of the school opening. It was a brand new school here in El Paso on the west side, called Rosa Guerrero, and this third grade class was like I guess the general education class, and then there was a separate class. I don't know if it was called a bilingual class or the English as a second language class. I don't know what it was, but we would get pulled out for part of the day, and I remember us just doing coloring activities. The El 16 de Septiembre came that week, and we did red, white, and green coloring activities. And me having this knowing at this age of like, I'm not learning anything here. I don't feel like this is helping me. And so I had that conversation with my mom. I brought it up to her. I said, "Ma, no quiero estar ya en esta clase. Like, I don't want to be in that class anymore." I don't even know what it was called, but I just had this knowing that if I continued to stay in that class, that I wasn't gonna learn or grow in the way that I felt like I needed to. I think as the oldest, I always was very responsible, and I really cared about doing well in school. And so that was something that, like, I'm sure probably surprised my mom. I haven't talked to her about that, but I'm sure it surprised her that her 8-year-old daughter was like, I don't want to be in that class because I'm not learning in that class. But I was very happy to sign up to do tutoring after school, tutoring before school, and to sign up to do even like the summer writing camps. I was very happy to do that. But that one thing, I don't know why, I just knew I had this knowing. And I do remember that by the time we got to fifth grade, that the kids that stayed in that class, there was a difference between us academically. I know that, like, which is really unfortunate. But again, it was never prohibited for me to speak Spanish at school. It wasn't punished either. It wasn't really encouraged per se because none of my teachers ever spoke Spanish with me, but I never felt like I was going to be punished from speaking it. Now, through my college years and through my career as an educator, different opportunities have presented themselves for me to speak Spanish. But before I get into that, I want to talk about how even though my first language was Spanish and I could speak it fluently, reading and writing it, I attribute to my skills in those two areas to Jehovah's Witnesses. So my mom had these friends who were Jehovah's Witnesses, and they would come over and they would read this thing called La Atalaya and El Libro de Cuentos Bíblicos. I'll put up a picture of them just to give you an idea. And they would have me read them, and then they would ask me questions. And it was honestly like the way that I see it now is like it was like kind of like a mini reading lesson because they would ask me, ¿Qué piensas de esto? O ¿qué están diciendo aquí? ¿Cuál es el significado? Like, what is it was basically a comprehension question. And of course, me being the curious kid that I was, I asked a lot of questions too. Mind you, I will say I do feel some trauma from some of the teachings. I feel like it instilled a lot of fear with me, which did actually affect my coming out too, and my mental health in particular. Um, I kind of didn't realize until like my early 30s actually how this experience really instilled a lot of fear in me, but that's a whole nother conversation. But basically, I attribute my reading and writing skills in Spanish to the teachings from the Jehovah's Witnesses at that point in our life. And honestly, me being able to speak, read, and write in Spanish has really given me opportunities throughout, like I mentioned, college and throughout my teaching career. So, like, for example, like in undergrad, I had this job as a research assistant for a professor. She was researching public health publications in the borderlands. So we were comparing the newspaper from Juarez, which is across the border in Mexico, this newspaper that they have called El Diario. We were comparing it to the El Paso newspaper, the El Paso Times. We were comparing what topics are they publishing, public like what are they putting out there every week regarding public health, and what are the issues that they're really focused on, and are they relevant to the borderland. And so I was reading through a lot of newspapers. The newspapers that I had to look at were in a 4-year window. When I was helping out this professor, the that was the window that I was looking at, and they were both in English and Spanish. And I know for a fact that I got that job because I was the only one in that program at the time who was speaking Spanish, and the professor knew that. Interestingly enough, a few years later, this professor asked me. I still, I still feel weirded out by it. She asked me where I was from, which I didn't know how to make sense of that question. And I was like, well, I was raised here in the borderland, but I was born in California. Is that what you're asking? And she's like, no, it's just that your accent, I can't tell where you're from. And I'm like, well, I guess from a little bit of everywhere. I don't mind you. She's asking me this question in front of my classmates, like while I'm in grad school when she asked me that question. And I felt kind of singled out. Normally if it's a one-on-one conversation, I wouldn't mind, but it just felt like so random for her to be asking me that. And like I couldn't understand what she meant that she couldn't tell where my accent was from. And she even pressed me further like if I was from northern New Mexico. Just for some context with that, there are some Spanish history in northern New Mexico, and I would argue that there's some form of elitism, like, or sense of superiority with that. And I'm not from there, and I wouldn't claim to have that. And I'm not really interested in that. I find it very confusing when people really pride themselves in their Spanish roots. Because I'm like, they're still call there's what I don't know. I can go on a whole tangent about that, but all this to say, I don't think it was intended to be a microaggression, but it kind of was because I felt like now looking back, it was just kind of like saying, are you saying that I sound too smart because you can't distinguish my accent? What exactly are you trying to say? Mind you, I think she was just genuinely curious, but I also think she needed to really analyze herself on that, on why she felt it was like appropriate to ask me that question in front of my peers, and she was not asking anybody else. And I was the only Spanish speaking person in that room too. But anyway, I've had various experiences where me being a Spanish speaker has really served me. I remember when I moved to New Orleans, I would have never thought that speaking Spanish there would have served me, but it actually did. Somebody from the district office found out from the school that I was working at. They found out that I speak Spanish, and they came to the campus and they asked me if I would be interested in doing summer school with students who were multilingual learners, students from the Dominican Republic, Honduras, Peru, um, I can't remember where else, several places in Central and South America. And I was like, yeah, for sure. And I was like, but what exactly do you want me to teach them? Well, we're just going to have you focus on this phonics program and supporting them and building up their reading fluency. And I'm like, bet. And another thing she told me was like, just get them comfortable speaking and conversing in English. Awesome. I will tell you that I did that for 2 summers. That has been one of the most fulfilling parts of my career because the way that I was able to connect with these students, their families, from my understanding, what the district told me and what they shared with me, their families were there because they helped with the rebuilding of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina happened in 2005, and I was out there in 2008. And a lot of families decided to stay out there through the rebuilding. And I guess that's why the students were there in this district that did not have the program to support them. And I was a part of the equation during the summer school period, and it was just awesome. It was just really awesome, and I really enjoyed it. And I actually I remember to celebrate the end of the summer program, I would bring them ice cream, and we would do these like little Mickey Mouse ice cream. So I would put 2 scoops of vanilla, and then I would put vanilla wafers for the ears, and then M&Ms for the nose and the eyes, and then like Hershey syrup for the tail. And honestly, like to me, that was a very special thing that I was able to do just because I speak Spanish. And I'll try to post up a picture of that of some of these things and just to kind of give an idea. But again, throughout my career, just me speaking Spanish has just really served as an asset. But it's interesting because at some point I there's this messaging that being a multilingual learner or that English is not your first language, at some point folks gets communicated to them that it's a deficit or that it's a setback, which to me is honestly just very puzzling. And through my career as an educator, and even just looking back on my experience as a college student, I became very aware of like this idea of xenophobia, uh this fear or hatred of people from different places, people who speak different languages, and how again it's just kind of treated as like a deficit or setback when I have evidence in my lifetime of how it has really served me and how I really do consider it a gift being able to speak Spanish. And here's the thing though. This expression that we use, el que no tranza no avanza, I just think it's, to me, it's one of the most beautiful things about our culture, how creative we can be, how funny we can be, and how intelligent we can be as a means to survive this world and to succeed. This expression, el que no tranza no avanza, is just this idea of like, you gotta do what you gotta do to get ahead and to make it. And sometimes that requires breaking or bending the rules. Sometimes that requires playing the system. Now, I'm not saying break the law. I mean, I'm not ever going to get on the internet and say break the law. But you got to do what you got to do to get ahead. And it's this understanding of, like, again, that the system was not designed with us in mind. The workforce, the school system, the justice system, the healthcare system, they're not designed with us in mind. for us to succeed. That's why we have things like recidivism. That's why we experience imposter syndrome. All these things are all connected, and so when I hear this expression, "el que no tranza no avanza," it's just like you're acknowledging that, and that you're gonna actually not let that be the reason why you don't succeed. Because for me personally, me having a victimized stance has not been helpful to me. I can acknowledge systemic issues and also empower myself and knowing that I have the intelligence, the savviness, the resourcefulness, the resilience, which I have a complicated relationship with that word, the persistence to be able to make it. And I have done that throughout my entire life. And honestly, props to my parents because I feel like I learned that by just watching them, from my mom selling shoes to her selling burritos and sandwiches at construction sites to her taking care of kids to us going to the grocery store and her getting in one line and me getting another line because cereal boxes were on sale. And so she would give me a $20 bill and say, "You buy this many cereal boxes, I will buy this many cereal boxes because there's a limit on the grocery papers. We got to do what we got to do." And I was even that kid in middle school that like would sell candies out of my backpack because I wanted to buy myself a pair of Adidas. I was that kid in high school, fun fact, who sold Avon during PE out of my backpack. And I would write up the receipts and calculate the taxes. And I would put in the order. And I would bring the orders in the little baggies. I mean, you got to do what you got to do. And that is something that I think about often. And I've been sitting with this because, almost 2 weeks ago, they told us at my current job that the school's not reopening for the upcoming school year. And yes, there's this fear um that I have because we're still waiting to hear back. They did tell us that they're going to pay us through the end of July. And I've been actively, while we finish up our last week of work this week, I've been actively looking at different opportunities and applying for different jobs. I've been picking up on my freelance work just to make it work because I just know that like me giving up is not an option. Me quitting is not an option for me. And this idea of el que no tranza no avanza, like you got to do what you got to do to make it. If you got to pivot, you will pivot. I'm at this point in my career, having been an educator for 20 years now. I know that some people say, "Laura, why do you make it a point to say it?" Because I give myself credit for that. Like I have stuck it out this far and I'm not going to downplay that. I have paid my dues and then some. But at this point, I'm going to do what I got to do. If I need to find another job and do a major career pivot, I will do that and I'm okay with that. Um, and I would encourage anybody and everybody to do the same. You do what you gotta do. You make the system work for you so that you can make it and so that you can live the life that you're meant to live. Those are just my thoughts. I love this expression. I find it funny. I find it intelligent. And I'm very grateful for this gift that my parents gave me of being bilingual and that they have instilled in me that, like, if there isn't a way, you find one or you make one. Um, but us rendirte no es una opción. Like giving up is not an option. And so yeah, I just wanted to share these random thoughts. I I'm looking forward to the next one. I have my last episode of Lo que se ve no se preguntan coming out this upcoming Monday. Thank you for being here.